Well, good morning again, and welcome. I'm Becky, one of the pastors at our church. Welcome to those of you who are here in person, to those of you who are joining us online and out at our tent, and especially welcome to all of you kids. We are so happy that you are with us here in church. Hey, Clara, I'm so glad to see you. It's always one of my favorite Sundays when we get the kids here with us in church. So I have a question for all of you kids to start things off, all right? Raise your hand if you have ever participated in any kind of sporting event, whether it was like on a soccer team or in gym class, any kind of sporting event. All right, we got some hands. All right, thank you, hands down. Now, all of you grown-ups in the house, please raise your hand if you have ever attended the sporting event of a young person, whether it's your child, a niece, a nephew, a friend, whoever. All right, we got some hands in the house. And that is because here in Greater Acton, that is what we do. In addition to my full-time job as a pastor, did you know I have another full-time job? That is going to my children's sporting events. We had one Saturday recently where, I kid you not, our family had one soccer game, 3 basketball games, and 2 boys running in a day-long cross-country meet. This is legit, folks. All right. I went to a soccer game last night. Yes, my niece Emmy Richards and the Littleton High School girls soccer team won the first round of the state tournament. Yes. I received word that the AB girls high school soccer team and our very own Alicia Umora also won their first game in the state tournament. So they're moving on. This is exciting. But there is one game in particular this morning that I would like to tell you about. 6th grade girls soccer. And I want to tell you about it because something appalling happened at this game. All right, it was last Saturday. Freezing cold, I know I'm a saint of a mother, freezing cold rain. And I'm just sitting there minding my own business under my umbrella on my soaking wet chair when a girl from my daughter's team, from the AB team, just very innocently is dribbling the ball down the field when all of a sudden a girl from the other team comes out of nowhere and just pushes the girl that was on my daughter's team. Can you believe that? What kind of player just pushes another player like that? I was so exasperated. I'm like, did you see that? Did you see that? I was wishing that another parent was close enough within earshot so we could start commiserating with each other. Like, where are these girls from? Who are they? What town is this? They just push kids out on the field. I was like rummaging for my phone because I wanted to text Willie, because he was at the boys' sporting event. So I wanted to text him and tell him what had happened. And then all of a sudden, though, I remembered something. And when I did, I stopped flailing. I just kind of quietly put my hands in my lap. I closed my mouth, and I turned bright red because this is what I remembered. I was so appalled, exasperated at this girl from that other team, but I remembered that just the previous week, I had noticed the same thing happened, except the girl who did the pushing, she was on my daughter's team. And when that happened, I wasn't appalled. I didn't get exasperated. I think I even chuckled. I mean, not like glad that the girl was being violent, but I chuckled like, oops, oh, you sweet thing, you're just getting a little overexcited, and you just happened to push the other girl. It happens. And when I realized my double standard, sitting there in the rain at this 6th grade girls soccer team game, all of a sudden I felt ridiculous. I was the ridiculous one in this situation, not only because I was so worked up about 6th grade soccer, but I felt ridiculous because of that double standard. Because when it was a girl on the other team who did the pushing, I felt like she was inferior, that she wasn't deserving of grace, that she somehow was less capable of contributing something important and good to the all-important world of sixth grade soccer, whereas the girls on my daughter's team were clearly innocent. So in short, what happened last Saturday is that I had officially become the self-entitled, tribalistic, upper-middle-class suburban soccer mom who always assumes that my kid is right, the other kid needs reforming. And I was horrified. I was horrified. Right now, we're in a sermon series called Did God Fail? Because in the world of 1st and 2nd Kings, which we've been reading from, it certainly seemed like God had failed epically. Israel had been this great and glorious nation, a people who could not fail, who couldn't do any wrong. Under Solomon, their military might, it was unmatched. Their temple, it was grand and sparkling, a testament to the world. Everyone feared them and the power of their God. Folks, they were it. They were it. They were favored by God, and it showed. But in this moment, where we find God's people today, in 2 Kings chapter 5, well, the Arameans had just defeated the Israelites in a really significant battle. And the king of Israel is suddenly cowering before the king of Aram. He's terrified. The kingdom is divided. The temple will soon be destroyed. By all appearances, God has abandoned them. God has failed in God's promise to make Israel great, a testament to God's saving love on earth. But what our scripture for today shows us, with the story of Elisha, Naaman, and Gehazi, who I'm going to talk about in a minute, what their stories demonstrate is that, in fact, God hadn't failed. Instead, God knew exactly what God was doing, even allowing Israel to lose that great battle with Aram so that they could ultimately learn a bigger and much more important lesson. What God wanted to teach Israel is exactly what God taught me on the soccer field last Saturday. That greatness, it isn't about me and mine, pridefully assuming that my way of seeing things is the right one. Instead, God showed them, God shows us what happens when we fail to see things from another person's point of view, much less humble ourselves to actually learn something from it. And we Christians, man, we are like gold star doing this. We do it all the time. I grew up in the conservative evangelicalism of the 80s and 90s. Some of you will be familiar with it. In the days of the rise of the religious right, with its sense that the world was out to get us, that culture was something to be feared, that somehow we Christians, or rather our particular understanding and expression of Christianity, somehow had the corner on the market of truth, that we had God figured out, that we knew what Jesus would do without a shadow of a doubt in every circumstance. It's why we listened exclusively to Christian music, attended Christian concerts, read Christian authors, hung out with Christian friends, and saw friends who weren't Christians as sort of like projects. Like we had an agenda in those friendships. They were really just people to be converted because anything secular was a threat. Now, all of this was under the guise of religion. We meant well, I guess. But in hindsight, I have to wonder, was it really about my deep love for God, or was there something else that we were trying to protect? Was it actually about the truth, or was it more about protecting the pride, the purity of my group, of our way of seeing things? And now when you step back and look at the whole picture, this is actually the very question that our scripture reading for today raises for us. In fact, it's a question that the Bible raises again and again, not just with Jesus, but actually throughout Israel's entire history. Because the truth is, we humans, we are much more comfortable understanding God through our own perspective, our own lens, interpreting God through that, through our own experience. But the story of Naaman, the story of Gehazi too, they won't let us do that. At every turn, Scripture itself says God can't be contained by one group. God can't be contained by just one perspective. Instead, there is something to learn and experience of God everywhere. Something to experience and learn of God everywhere. All right, the story of Naaman. Love this story. Now, from Israel's perspective, right, Naaman is definitely an outsider. And he's not just any outsider. Naaman is the enemy. He is the military general who led the Aramean army in defeating Israel miserably. Right? So in his world, Naaman's got everything going for him except for this one problem. Naaman has leprosy. And even among his own people, this could make Naaman an outsider. But because of Naaman's greatness, the king of Aram goes to bat for him. And when Naaman learns through his Israelite servant girl that there's a prophet in Israel who could heal him, the king of Aram says, go and find this man who can heal you. Now, what's interesting is that even though Naaman is an outsider, even though he's the enemy, Elisha, this prophet in Israel, chooses to help him, to believe that God might want to work even in and through Naaman's life, through this outsider's life. But the problem here is that Naaman doesn't like how Elisha wants to help him. Right? Even though, Naaman does show humility in listening to his Israeli servant girl in order to come and ask Elisha for help. But then when Elisha doesn't receive Naaman in the way that Naaman expects, in the way that, come on, he deserves as a war hero, well, Naaman's pride is totally piqued. Right? He expected Elisha to come out and meet him in this grand fashion. He actually says, I expected him to stand and call on the name of the Lord, to wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. So when Elisha doesn't do that, when Elisha doesn't treat Naaman with the respect he deserves, what Naaman does is go all tribalistic on him. He goes soccer mom on this guy, right? As we heard in the reading, what Elisha told Naaman is that if he wants to be healed, he should go take a dip in the Jordan River 7 times, and all would be well. That's right, 7 times. Simple, right? But to Naaman, it was so simplistic as to actually be insulting. So Naaman's like, aren't the rivers in Damascus better than the pathetic waters in Israel? A little bath is all it's going to take. Surely my people's rivers are better than their rivers. But the thing is, all this talk about rivers, see, it's really just a smokescreen to something else. And what it's a smokescreen to is Naaman's right out there in the open ethnocentrism. He's insulted by Elisha, so he wants to make the point that as an Aramean, he's better than some stupid Israelite and his stupid rivers. And that's exactly what Naaman's servants point out to him, probably not without some trepidation, when they say to their master, this highly exalted war hero, Naaman, like, if Elisha had told you to do some great thing, like climb a mountain and dump all these coins down it, or I don't know, maybe to collect a whole bunch of your enemy's foreskins because, like, they did that kind of thing then, well, then wouldn't you have done it? So what's the big deal with taking a bath in a river? Well, it wasn't about the bath. What it was about was Naaman's pride. What it was about was his belief that his rivers, his people, his way of seeing and doing things, they are the best, they are right. So it's all the more significant that just like Naaman had the humility, the wherewithal to listen to his Israeli servant, so now he has the humility to, again, listen to someone beneath him, to someone who's outside his inner circle. Naaman led with pride. He had a bit of an edge, a bit of an attitude toward those outside his inner circle. But he comes around here to humility. He listens to his servants. And even though Elisha wouldn't play to his pride, in the end, Naaman listened to Elisha. He went down to that river. He dipped himself in the Jordan, and he came out clean. The text says that his skin, it became like that of a young boy. This is so significant because Naaman was a great man, standing tall on everyone's shoulders, protected by his group, his status. But what saved Naaman was becoming like a young boy. In some ways, becoming more like his outsider servant girl than a great Aramean war hero or king. What saved Naaman was being willing to admit that there might be some truth to be had, some life and healing to be found, even something of God to know and experience outside of his own circle of understanding and experience. Have you ever experienced that? Like you were so surprised when you saw something of God, tasted something of God where you didn't expect it. It was outside the church, even outside your circle of Christian friends. But you know what? The greatest irony of the story, it actually comes in the second half of 2 Kings chapter 5, past where Kathy left off in our reading for today. All right, so Naaman is an outsider who God chooses to heal. And to Naaman, Elisha is the outsider, but he's willing to submit himself, to submit in order to be healed, to listen and to learn something new of God. And this is a story all about how God's grace and healing, it's not just for insiders. Naaman is an outsider who starts the story with leprosy and ends up healed. But there's another character in the second half of this chapter. It's Gehazi. It's Elisha's servant. And Gehazi, he's an insider in Israel who starts out the story with clean skin and ends up with Naaman's illness transferred to him. Why? Why does that happen? Well, where Naaman learned and practiced humility to listen and learn from those outside his circle, Gehazi saw Naaman as nothing but this Aramean. He literally calls him that, Naaman, this Aramean. Right? He's this ethnic and religious outsider, not deserving of the generosity that Elisha showed him. This was at the heart of Gehazi's insider mentality. It doesn't seem fair to him that an outsider should receive healing. Naaman doesn't deserve it. He doesn't deserve grace. He should have to pay for what he got here in Israel. So while Elisha turned down all the lavish thank you gifts that Naaman tried to give him after he was healed, Gehazi says, he's not getting away with that. He actually goes after Naaman. Gehazi lies to Naaman saying, Elisha changed his mind. He actually wants some of the loot after all. Gehazi lies to him. He takes the spoils for himself and then he hides it from Naaman. It's fascinating. It's telling. So this insider, Gehazi, he is devious. He's a snake. And this outsider, Naaman, he is gracious. He's gracious. He gives Gehazi double what he asked for. And ultimately, Gehazi's seed, it's uncovered. Naaman figures him out, for nothing is hidden from God. And as a consequence, Elisha declares that now Naaman's leprosy will cling to you, Gehazi, and to your descendants forever. You see, we think that 2 Kings chapter 5, it's about Naaman. But the punchline of the whole chapter is that it's really about Gehazi. It's about how we on the inside of anything, particularly on the inside of any kind of religious institution or faith tradition, how we tend to view others as a threat, as less worthy, even as projects to be accomplished or souls to be converted, rather than as human beings who, regardless of their nationality, because of their nationality, ethnicity, social locatedness, and beliefs, all reflect something of who God is in this world, because all people, every single one of them is created in the image of God. Because of that, all people have the potential to teach us something about who God is, to allow us to experience something of God in new and surprising ways. It's right here in this story. It's Naaman, an ethnic and religious outsider who teaches us this. And it's the stories of Elisha, Naaman, and Gehazi that teach us that God is everywhere, so much bigger than we know, and that God's salvation, God's special favor, it wasn't just for Israelites. And not to shock you or anything here, but it's not necessarily just for us Christians. It's not a prize to be hoarded. It's not an entitlement to shield us from the responsibility of really listening to and learning from others. But rather, it's a gift for all people. A gift that if Israel wasn't willing to share with those outside their tribe, they would ultimately lose. Because just like they were defeated by the Arameans in Elisha's time, eventually the entire nation of Israel would be defeated and exiled. Whew. That's why the people ask, did God fail us? But another answer that Kings gives to this question is that what has really failed is not God, but the expectation that God only works in us, that God only works through our tribe. Instead, the story of Naaman is just one example of many of how God is working and can work through outsiders and even enemies of our tribe. Fast forward in time, and this is what Jesus gets so angry about when he's preaching in the synagogue in his hometown. Jesus has created quite the splash. By this time, after his time of preparation in the wilderness, the Gospel of Luke says that Jesus returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit, and news about him spread through the whole countryside. Everyone praised him. So when he gets to Nazareth, his hometown, the excitement is high, right? Here's our boy. Here's our hometown hero. But then, after preaching about good news for the poor, freedom for prisoners, sight to the blind, the people of Nazareth turn on Jesus and try to throw him off a cliff. What happened? What's going on? Well, it's because Jesus has the audacity to suggest that this healing, this freedom, this good news of God, it's not just for them, the hometown favorites. It might not even be primarily for them, God's special and chosen people. Instead, God's salvation, God's justice, God's goodness and grace, it's for the widow out in Zarephath, whose oil and flour Elijah multiplied, whose son Elijah raised from the dead. If you remember, we talked about that. We read that story a few weeks ago. There were widows at home in Israel, but those aren't the ones that Jesus chose to help. This salvation, this justice, this goodness, it's for Naaman, the Syrian, the Aramean, the outsider whom Elisha healed of leprosy. And so the point is that from God's people Israel so many years ago to us here today in the Christian church, we can have this way of getting our tails up at the idea that God might just be at work in ways and places that we don't quite understand, maybe even and through people that we find offensive. As Episcopal priest and professor of religion Barbara Brown Taylor says it so well, we can struggle to remember that no one owns God. No one owns God. And while in theory we might say it's true, in practice, as Christians, we have quite the history of getting nervous at the idea that God is bigger than any one person or people group, one perspective or way of seeing or experiencing God. And the problem with this is that not only does our hubris lead us, the church, to judge and exclude those we don't understand or agree with, it also keeps us from listening and learning from voices that we desperately need to hear, different experiences of God that have something important to teach us that could even heal us, just like Naaman was healed. What do you think of that? Right? That Jesus might want to heal you, that God might want to heal us, the church, even partly through people who don't even call on his name. Ooh. Now, for the American church, this can be a little shocking. It can be a hard pill to swallow. Like, we like to think that we have it figured out, that we have all the answers if people would just listen to us like they did back in the good old days. It can make us anxious to think that the clear dogma of one right and highly specific way to understand God and the life that God approves of, maybe it's not all there is. Maybe there's actually more here. Maybe Christians in different parts of the church, different parts of the world, dare I say, maybe even people who don't identify as Christians, folks from different religions, Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, maybe they can reflect something to us of who Christ is. Now, I experienced this in a really concrete and powerful way just last year. It was when a woman connected to our church who doesn't identify as a Christian, but someone who we have as a church have partnered with in supporting Syrian refugees. Well, she posted something on Facebook. She wrote, "Though not a Christian, I very much admire the focus on love, self-sacrifice, and care for the other, even the lowliest among people, at the center of Jesus' story. But it has blown my mind how many religious people have been able to overlook the complete absence of love, self-sacrifice, and care so often shown, even reveling in hatred and uncaring harm of other people. I have found it very hard to understand how people who take Jesus' teaching seriously can countenance such behavior." Ouch. Ouch, and yes. Yes. My friend Beatrice is Naaman all over again, speaking from outside the church about something we, the church, need to hear. It's just like the many Gentiles God employs throughout Israel's history to help them see where they've gone astray and how to find God again. Somebody from the outside telling us, God's people, something that we need to hear. But the problem is, if we are so obsessed with me and my group, with seeing it our way, with our rules for who is in, for who is out, if we're too busy demanding God's special and exclusive favor for me and mine, then we are not going to be able to hear those voices. We are not going to be able to hear those prophets. And when I think of all the young people who have left the church en masse in recent decades, when I hear my own kids' questions, with their skepticism, their disinterest, even their anger toward the church at times, I think at heart, this right here, friends, this is what it is about. You see, for so many of our young people, it's actually pretty simple. Truth is truth wherever it is found. Goodness is goodness. Love is love. It doesn't make sense to them how we carve up who is worthy and what is deemed holy or not. They have far less trouble than many of us recognizing God wherever God shows up. They don't look for some qualified Christian stamp of approval in order to be open to listen, to learn. And more, I just want to be like them. I want to listen and learn from our young people. Yes, I want to listen and learn from those who've come before. Absolutely. But also, I just want to stop talking so much. I want to learn. I want to learn from those who see the world in ways that I can struggle to understand, but I need to try to understand. Because they have something to teach me. Church, they have something to teach us. It can be scary, so scary, and I get that. I think back to when I was a kid in church. So the grown-ups around me when I was a kid, they were pretty convinced that if you got a tattoo or one too many piercings, you were totally headed to hell in a handbasket. Like you were on the slippery slope headed south, baby. And now look at us. Like, I'm not going to ask anybody to lift shirts or anything, but I am guessing that we have more than a few tattoos in this room. Yep. Yeah, I think we do. And guess what? Here you are, still in church, still following Jesus. Imagine that. And you know what? So many of those kids who got the tattoos, who got the piercings, guess who's leading the church today? Those kids who realize that Jesus is bigger than our moralisms and bigger than our fear. That Jesus was the first one to listen and to learn and to ask questions and to not be afraid to think outside the box. Kids, you might not know this, but you know your goody two-shoes Pastor Willie? Well, when he was in high school, he had like this 2-foot-high mohawk that he would put gelatin in so it would stick up straight for punk rock shows. Maybe not 2 feet, but it was one. Yeah, I know. I got a picture for you. We're going to post that sucker. He had the mohawk. He had chains he wore all around his arms and his neck. He was still wearing those chains and the sweatshirts with all the punk patches when I met him. And that wasn't him rebelling from God. No. That was a part of his journey of discovering God. And I am just so impressed. I am so inspired by those of you parents of teen and young adult children who I know have taken this so seriously. You have listened to your kids, even when it's hard, when they say or do things that you don't like or you don't get. It has freaked you out at times, if you're going to be really honest about this. It's freaked you out how your kids see the world, even at times how they see Jesus so differently than you do. But you know what you've done? You have listened to them. You have listened and you have learned something from your kids. And some of you on this journey, you've even experienced this incredible healing and new freedom in your own spiritual lives and experience of God because of it. Thanks be to God. God's mercies are new every morning. Because friends, the truth is it's not my job. It's not your job. It's not anybody's job to protect Jesus' uniqueness or purity, to set a fence around who has rights to him. Our job is to trust that God's a grown-up. God's big enough to stand up for God's self. That the story of Jesus, if it's true enough. It is powerful enough to speak for itself. So when someone says something that's outside my box, my job, my first job, it is to stop and to listen and to wonder, okay, what is God wanting to show me here? What is God trying to teach me, to help me see that I haven't seen before? And I love this. I love it because what it means is that I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to live life on the defensive. I don't have to be afraid of people who think differently than me or look differently than me, who pray differently than me, even people who believe differently than me, because just like God showed Israel again and again, like Jesus preached in his hometown, no one has the corner on the market of who God is and how God works. It's good to remember that that is precisely what was so scandalous about Jesus. God had come among us, a carpenter from out in Galilee who died on a cross. And he came proclaiming life for all people, especially the ones that everybody else had counted out. If Jesus didn't fit into anyone's pre-existing God box, maybe we, the followers of Jesus, shouldn't try to put God in a box either. Maybe we can trust that God chooses where and how God will move and work, and we can just chill the heck out. How does that sound? We can wait for God. We can watch for God. We can learn from the story of Jesus and what he had to say about the tendency of God's people to draw hard lines around who's in and who's out. We can revel in glimpses of God wherever and however God decides to show up. And we can partner with others in the work of God, partner with whomever is interested in that work, no matter their spiritual credentials or inclinations. Friends, we can pray, God, give me your eyes to see where you are moving. Not where I think you should be moving, but where you are moving. God, give me ears to hear where and how you are speaking. Give me a heart that is willing and brave enough to be surprised by you. Help me to listen. Help me to learn for the sake of your kingdom, for God's glory on this earth. Let's pray. Oh God, we are so quick to put you in our boxes, to make you in our image, where we think that we're comfortable, where we think that we are reassured and unafraid. But God, the truth is you are so much bigger and greater than any of our boxes. And what a miracle, what a wonder that you are so big. Your love is so high and deep and wide and long that there is nothing and nobody in this world that is untouched by it. That every single person who walks this earth is created in the image of God, reflects something to us of who Christ is. God, we want to live open and wild and free, looking for you, trusting you, not needing to defend or hide in any way, but to be willing to be changed by that which we don't expect, to humble ourselves, to listen and to learn, so that we can know the fullness of who you are and how your Spirit is at work in this world. Help us to see, help us to hear. Give us hearts brave enough to be open to you.